Hey guys, TC here. Good morning and salute. Gotta need some coffee for this one. I was watching Asmund Gold's clip this morning, and I do enjoy his content. And he's a fellow Texan. He lives in Austin, and he was illustrating how Republicans are losing, and some or perceived losing in politics right now. And it has to do with Israel. Look, man, I don't hate Jewish people. I don't. But I'm not a big fan of the nation of Israel, because they have done some horrible things to the United States. USS Liberty, chief amongst them. But it's also the philosophy, too. Jews are responsible for giving us Marxism, and it's an evil ideology. And we saw what happened with communism, and it even spread from there to give us fascism and then ultimately Nazism. They don't like to claim that because it backfired on them, right? Their own socialism ideology came back and bit them on the ass. And it culminated into the Holocaust, which is why there's such a propaganda campaign out there to distance the left from Nazism and fascism, when ultimately there was, in the 20th century, it was a fight between two left-wing ideologies: fascism and communism. They were created for, by, and fought by leftists. Those are just facts. Those are facts. And they don't want to take responsibility. Fine, whatever. But here's the big thing, and we're seeing it a lot, and it's unfortunate because one of my favorite politicians is Ted Cruz. And it's galling to see a man of that stature going out of his way to show how he's kowtowing to a state in the Middle East about the size of New Jersey. I am not a religious man. I'm agnostic. Though I do hold some cultural Christian beliefs because I grew up in a Christian society. But as far as thinking that Jesus is out there casting magic spells, magic missile, water to wine, No, I don't believe any of that. Spitting into people's eyes they can see again, rising from the dead, the whole 9 yards. No more than I believe that Zeus resides on top of Mount Olympus, or pick a religion. Just pick one. I think they're all bullshit, personally. Up to and including Judaism. Do I believe Moses was with the Pharaoh's vizier and they're having a stick to snakes fight? Or he's parting the Red Sea, or whatever the hell? No, I don't believe any of that. Though Charlton Heston was a hell of an actor, I will say that. Anywho, my biggest beef with Israel is that they play both sides of the fence on all the fields on the planet. And that has to stem, I believe, that the Jewish people themselves were a stateless people until Israel was reformed. And I think they perceive states and nationalism as a real evil, and that is the problem, and they should just live like the Jews, where they were supposedly got along with everybody, even though they were a people that were united by an ethnicity and a religion. They never called any one place home. And that's the philosophy they use for globalism, and they want to extrapolate that for all of us. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And their philosophy is culminated into what we're witnessing right now here in the United States. We have foreign-born people coming in and taking control because they breed faster than us, because when you're from a poor country, you're not under the same economic conditions, qualifiers, pressures. You're not under the same economic pressures to keep a family small, because it's very expensive to properly raise a child. And here in the United States, it's normally required to have both parents working, which doesn't leave a lot of time for baby making or rearing, which is why there's such a push for state-sponsored childcare, which I still think is a mistake. Anywho, it's a little bit of a tangent. The point is, their philosophy has allowed the foreigners to come into our country by the millions. And go ahead and give them the agency, give them the vote. Watch them form enclaves within the United States and take control. We're seeing it happen in Minneapolis, even though the latest Somali migrant was rebuffed. They're just going to redouble their efforts for the next go around. All right. Dearborn, Michigan's already lost. Toledo, Ohio is not very far behind them. We saw what happened with Mamdani in New York City, brazenly out in the open, calling out Trump that he's foreign-born. The people that voted for him are foreign-born. They now outnumber the natives in New York City, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we also see that in other areas too, such as the LA or Los Angeles area. Because you see how many illegals roach out when ICE comes into town, right? It's turning out that a massive portion of Southern California, that region, are illegals, which means they are heavily overrepresented in our Congress. And that's a real problem, because they still are counted on the census. So we need to shore up the grammar in some of our laws. Anyway, the point is, a lot of this is because Israel plays both sides of the fence, and they're whispering in our politicians' ear like Grimer Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings. That Lord of the Rings seems to be in the zeitgeist right now, and I think it's appropriate. I do. The orcs are in the Shire, so to speak. And I think that's very apropos, calling Israel Grimer Wormtongue, because that's what they do. They're whispering in the ears of these world leaders, and they're playing both sides of the fence. They pretend to be your friend when they ultimately have their own agenda that they're fulfilling. And that's a problem. And the American people are somewhat slow to anger because they don't want to believe it, right? They're propagandized too. We still have a very large religious aspect to our culture, and there's been some propaganda going on as far as Reformation in the Christian community, at least in the Protestant side, with this whole cultural shift towards something called dispensationalism, the dispensation of grace from God. But it also places Israel or the Jewish people on a higher pedestal because they are God's chosen people. And that's a problem. Anytime you got any segment of our society claiming to be God's chosen people is a problem, because that just gives you license to commit atrocities or whatever half-ass, half-baked agenda that you want to fulfill because you think you're ordained by God. And that's a problem. So, anytime you hear Christians talk about dispensationalism, it's Jewish propaganda. Just plain and simple. I mean, I hate to be crass about it, but it is. Right? It's the reinforcement that the Jews are God's chosen people, and that the Christians need to follow the Jewish leadership. And it's wrong. It's wrong. They can't know what era we're in, how much grace God is distributing among the peoples of the planet. Nobody has the phone to God. They're not talking to him. As far as I'm aware, that another prophet hasn't made themselves manifest. And it's bullshit, ultimately. I believe a lot in cultural Christianity, kind of like our forefathers. Thomas Jefferson was famous for having a Bible where he edited out all of the miracles, and he just focused on the teachings. And at least for the first half of the book, that's where we have a cultural bond with the Jewish people. A lot of them don't necessarily see it that way, because Judaism is the only example I could think of that conflates ethnicity with their religion. And I think that's where a lot of people get it mixed up. When you say a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, you're thinking of many different peoples. When you say Jew, you're thinking Torah, temples, synagogues, whatever. And you're also thinking of an ethnicity, the Hebrews. And again, I think that comes back with the false premise that they are God's chosen people. They're not. They're not. Nobody is. Nobody is. Though I will say, not all religions and cultures are equal. They're just not. I would rather deal with a Jewish individual than, say, Islam, or even Christians, because at least they're not worshiping a pedophile. They don't have super crazy beliefs about how you're affronting Allah by being a homosexual and throwing people off roofs, but also buried in your Quran, Muhammad went on a homosexual bender with the Al-Zuts. It's all in there. He was a legitimate pedophile, and he did get mounted like a stallion, according to the Quran, by the Al-Zuts for a week-long bender in the dunes of the desert. And maybe after that, that's where he had some guilt about being homosexual. I don't know. It's a very screwed up religion. I'm not a fan. It's got its own problems. Chief among those, I mean, when those are foundational issues that I have, I mean, it's a problem. Anywho, we're not talking about that right now. So, What I'm saying is that we have Jews whispering right here, Jews whispering right here. They may be from different factions, but they're working with a common purpose. They're playing both sides of the field. And they're not just doing it with the United States. And by the way, if we stop being so friendly with Israel, they are more than willing to run to the arms of China and Russia. And I know I'm not a big fan of fence riders. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you know the only thing that fence riding gets you are splinters in your ass. You need to pick a side. Pick a side and just get there. You know, just be sure the side you pick is the side that you want. But you need to pick one. I don't like fence riders. Can't stand them. And Israel really needs to pick a side. Stop flirting with China and Russia and all the other people that are our adversaries currently. And if they really want to be our greatest ally, they need to act like it. And they need to stop trying to subvert our politics for their own agenda. If they have their own wants and needs, they can make it appeal to our government and to our people without trying to destroy our society from the inside out to more reflect what they think their world vision should look like. It's annoying. We're not stupid. We see it happening. That's why Israel's building so much resentment right now in the United States. It needs to stop. So that's where we're at. We're only 1 year basically into the Trump administration. He's gotten a lot of things done that I do agree with. This situation is, well, it's been going on for a while, but it's fairly recent as far as the zeitgeist goes. Because you're seeing it accelerate with characters like Nick Fuentes and some of others of his ilk are becoming more mainstream. And right now, they sound like very reasonable people because we can all see the shenanigans ourselves. And we know what their ideology has gotten us into, where our young can no longer afford housing. And then you have other Jews that run huge financial conglomerates like BlackRock, gobbling up all the homes above market value, preventing Americans from getting affordable homes. You know, Asmongold was showing a statistical data graph showing what used to be the median age of an American trying to purchase a home. Even back in the 90s, it was like 25 or 30. Now it's closer to 40. And it's having a deleterious effect on our birth rates because our young are basically failures to launch out of the home because they can't afford it. They can't afford it. And it's very hard to start a family, especially as a man, when you're supposed to be the provider and you can't even afford an apartment, and you're working full time, and you make what used to be reasonably decent money, but you're being priced out of your own society primarily by foreigners. And that's just the reality. That's why there's so much resentment with illegals and any other foreigner coming in right now. We are being priced out of our own society. And it's not going to stop, the resentment, until the situation solves itself. And the only way it's going to solve itself, it's going to be ugly, but it's the truth. The foreigners have got to go. And they're going to start with foreigners that are from incompatible cultures and societies. You know, we're going to go back to where we prioritize certain cultures, like European cultures, because they are more easily integrated in our society. Not so much from Latin America, not so much from, definitely not the Middle East. At least the Latin America are primarily Christians, even though they're Catholic. They still integrate better into society than, say, somebody from, I don't know, Mozambique, even Somalia. What the hell are we doing? Why are we bringing all the Somalis over here? I don't understand. They don't assimilate. Their cultural values are antithetical to the American way of life. And it's just everything they believe in is opposite, primarily, from what American. They don't believe in freedom of religion. They don't believe in rights for women. Any of that. So we are going to go to more of a 1960s based cultural acceptance about letting foreigners into the country, and that's going to be it. That's going to be it, and people are going to squawk and pitch a bitch fit, but that's just the way it's going to be. And I don't know what else to say about it. We are winding the clock back, and with all the globalism, all it did is we reached a point where we had tolerance, right? They were advocating and preaching tolerance for a lot of these things. And then it went from tolerance to acceptance to domination. And people are not going to tolerate it for very much longer. You're already seeing the cracks with some of the politicians we're putting back in the power, like Trump. And it's only going to get worse if we don't have a reckoning. And you need to understand that. And a lot of that is getting rid of the foreign influence out of our government. And right now, the big glaring example is Israel. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I hope very few people are going to see this, so it doesn't really matter. I use this to be cathartic. I know there's going to be people that agree and disagree, and that's fine. Again, I don't have any particular animosity for Jewish people themselves, but I am very fatigued with Israel, the state. And they need to step in line, act like our true friends, or get the fuck out of our way and leave us alone. And that's just how I feel about it, because their ideology is killing the United States. We are not a stateless people. We are from here. We built this society, and we didn't build it just to make room for third world savages. We just didn't. And we're not going to allow ourselves to be priced out of our own territory to make room for other people. We're just not going to allow it. Either through the ballot box or other measures. Because emotions and attitudes are ramping up. And again, a lot of this falls at the feet of Israel, because they're playing both sides of the field. They are creating this friction within our society so they could take advantage of the chaos. And it's obvious. So I, as a humble trucker, can notice this. I know I'm not the only one. Just being frank about it. Anyway, you guys take care. TC out.